Martinson Talks Books. And as we are speaking at this moment, there are cyclones in Australia. There are snowstorms in Chicago to New York that have not been seen for years. And there is uprising in Egypt. My guest today addresses all of this years before it ever happened. It's a warning. Her book is called The Watchman's Rattle, Thinking Our Way Out of Extinction, and it is written by Rebecca D. Costa with a foreword by E.O. Wilson, published by Vanguard Press. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me.
I mean, I can't believe what we are, as we are sitting here, what is happening, and that you wrote this book, because no book happens overnight, but you were being so prescient.
Well, I started the book about 6 years ago, as you know, and I could not have anticipated the timing of the book and the timing of these global problems that potentially threaten the entire planet and all of humanity.
Yeah. First of all, we have what you say, why civilizations disappear, using the Mayans. Water.
Well, with the Mayans, you know, they were around for 3,000 years, and they knew they had these drought problems for the majority of that period of time. So it's interesting that for a long period of time they were pursuing both man-made remedies as well as their beliefs, which happened to be fetishism. And as long as there was an accommodation for the pursuit of building reservoirs, underground cisterns, crop rotation, water conservation, they were masters in hydraulic engineering. As long as that was balanced against the fetishism, the society progressed. But as they reached a point in which they couldn't really understand climate change, an interesting turn of events happened where they began abandoning man-made methods and the rational pursuit of effective solutions to drought, and they began relying entirely on fetishism. At first, they sacrificed captured slaves, then they moved from captured slaves to their own people, and eventually, in the final hours prior to collapse, they were killing newborn infants as unspoiled sacrifice to the gods.
Sacrifices are part of what you call the memes, the super memes.
Yeah.
Define what a super meme is.
Well, in 1976, Dr. Richard Dawkins coined the phrase memes, and he came up with that word so that it would rhyme with genes. And what he observed is that there were certain behaviors and beliefs that acted like genes. They became inherited sort of organically from one generation to another. In my book, I claim that some of these beliefs and behaviors grow to such a infectious level that they begin to intrude on all aspects of human life. And when that happens, it thwarts and suppresses any other alternate methods. For example, with the Mayans, fetishism began to intrude and become the standard by which every decision was made, individually and by the government.
Would our use of global warming, which has become, all around, and they, how can it be global warming? Look at all the rain, look at all the snow. It masks the idea that what we're seeing is climate change being affected by carbon in the air.
That's correct. It's clearly not global warming. If we had labeled it climate change, we may be in a different position right now where we wouldn't be so confused. The fact is that far before one of these problems like global warming or drought, pandemic viruses, worldwide economic collapse, far before these problems eventually caused the collapse of the civilization, we see that the complexity of the problems that have to be solved by that particular civilization begin to exceed the cognitive capabilities and the knowledge that that civilization has. In many ways, 152 years ago, when Charles Darwin discovered evolution, the most important principle that governs all life on Earth, he also made a discovery that human civilizations can never progress beyond the capabilities that they have evolved to be able to handle.
Has the computer and the computer brain changed that at all for our civilization?
Well, I don't know about you, but it sure hasn't for me.
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed. I don't want another application for my cell phone. Now I'm supposed to have a cell phone, an iPod, a BlackBerry, a portable computer, an iPad.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in every other device. I don't know 50% of the features that my new car came with.
And you worked in Silicon
And I worked
Valley.
in Silicon Valley for
Yeah.
the majority of my life, and I can't keep up. In fact, I'm completely overwhelmed. I don't know if vaccines cause autism. A lot of parents don't know if they should vaccinate their children, just a basic thing like
Yeah.
that. It's gotten very difficult to get to the facts. And with the internet now, for every study that you can find that says one thing, you know, put your money in
Yeah.
Wall Street or vaccines are safe for you, you'll find another study that completely contradicts that.
By having the computer, I did say this to, Reza Aslan, who was here, and I said, well, you realize that without the original of audio tapes, there never would have been a revolution in Iran, because the Ayatollah was in Paris, being able to send these little tapes
That's
to
right.
be played. Now we're into the generation of what's happening in Egypt and revolution that is so, it's tomorrow's news.
We may very well not be equipped from a biological standpoint to deal with the level of communication, information, new technologies that we're expected to manage.
Yeah.
When you think about what's going on in Egypt right now, this is a matter of social media allowing people to communicate with each other. But we don't know what the social ramifications of millions of people coming together and simply asking for a change in government. Well, where does that take us?
Yes.
You know, many, many years ago, I remember a story about Henry Kissinger going to meet Zhou Enlai, who was the first president of the People's Republic of China. And Kissinger knew at that time that Zhou Enlai was a great student of history. So to open up the conversation, he thought he'd just throw a softball and said, you know, what do you think the effects of the French Revolution have been? And Zhou Enlai thought about it for a moment, and he said, too early to tell.
Yeah.
And that pretty much set the tone of the rest of their negotiations. What makes us think we know?
But you say about just now about our brains not being able to cope. We're seeing these people, and you talk about your daughter, that people who go out and, oh, we're going to overtake and take them out of Vietnam, take them out of Iraq. What's your plan?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What we find is that as we hit some limit in terms of our ability to manage complexity and manage all the data and information and the problems that we have to solve, as we hit that, some bizarre behaviors begin to manifest. And one of them is we become irrationally oppositional to everything. We start saying no to everything.
Talk about this in your book, about how you were in New York and your daughter.
Well, the first time I noticed it, I happened to be visiting some friends in New York, and my daughter was supposed to meet me for dinner, and unfortunately, she left a message that she'd been invited to protest the Iraq War, and she said it was going to be a few students. So I was very tired. I fell asleep on my bed, and when I woke up, there were millions of people that had poured into Times Square. It was one of the largest demonstrations against the Iraq War, and it happened spontaneously, very similar to what we see happening in Egypt right now. And in just a moment of coincidence, the anchorman happened to put a mic in front of my daughter's mouth. And I saw my daughter. It was a very surreal experience. I saw my daughter being interviewed. So he said, you know, why are you out today? And she described that since we had discovered there were no weapons of mass destruction, that the president shouldn't try to retrofit a reason for being in Iraq. And that's clearly what had happened. And then he said, well, what withdrawal plan are you in favor of? And she looked like a deer that had seen some headlights. She couldn't answer it. And so she reiterated why she was against the war, but she proposed no solution about how we should withdraw. And then I began to notice that he went through the crowd, and these were very educated, passionate people, but they seemed to oppose every solution put on the table. And by the way, when you oppose everything, that's tantamount to gridlock. That's why we have gridlock.
Yeah.
Just say no leads to gridlock.
And this goes back to the original, The Madness of Crowds, the old psychology book about the madness of crowds and the fact that they get together, and it is gridlock.
It is gridlock, and I think we can all agree that it's not just the United States. Individually, we feel a little paralyzed.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people that are trying to retire right now, and they can't figure out where it's safe to put their money. It used to be you could put a little in bonds, you could count on your Social Security check, the government was going to take care of your medical benefits. The whole game has changed now. It's become very complex and so complicated that as individuals, as governments, and even organizations like the United Nations are having trouble finding their way out.
Yeah. That's also part of the global, of the euro that you talk about, that having everybody on the same economic level, Greece defaults, Spain defaults.
Ireland's in trouble, you know, it's like dominoes. In the book I talk about the greatest models for sustainability come out of nature. Nature's been sustainable for billions of years.
What was that, the blue butterfly?
That's right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we know is that any drive toward singularity in nature is a drive toward extinction. So the opposite of that is true. When you have diversity, as you have diversity in your financial portfolio, when one thing goes down, another thing goes up. That's why, for years, financial advisors have been telling us to diversify.
But it leaves you in a stalemate. I mean, it's not as if you're going to go very high or very low, but you're leveled off.
But you're safe.
Yeah.
You see, a survival strategy requires diversification. But when you start driving towards singularity, as in a singular economy or a singular currency, you become much more vulnerable. And you don't have any fallback. And the example I use is I live on a butterfly preserve for the Smith's blue butterfly, which over a period of time, for whatever reason, began to rely on a single food source. And then as developers came in and you know, they weren't trying to deliberately kill off the Smith's blue butterfly, but they began eliminating that food source, and so went the Smith's blue butterfly. That's why it's on the endangered species list in California. So, but other butterflies have their favorite foods, and then when those are scarce, they move on to their second most favorite food, and they have a staggered food chain, just like human beings do. We have things we like to eat, and when those aren't around, we eat other things. So, you know, we make ourselves very vulnerable when we drive to a single point of view on anything.
Rebecca, what was the catalyst for you to get into this field?
Well, in 1976, when I was just finishing up school at UC Santa Barbara, I got a hold of a book by Dr. Edward O. Wilson, who is probably the best-known evolutionary biologist today, but at that time he was sort of a young grad student, and he wrote a book called Sociobiology, the New Synthesis, in which he proposed to us that not only do we inherit predispositions for cancer, diabetes, heart disease, but we also inherit predispositions toward behavior, which once served our ancestors well. They were once survival strategies. And even though those predispositions, for example, when we feel threatened by an ideology or a foreign person, our bodies are flooded with chemicals, and we're designed to either fight that person and enslave them or annihilate them or run from them. That's how our early ancestors survived. And what Wilson proposed is just because those urges and those instincts are not useful to modern man, let's not make the mistake that we've cleansed ourselves of those. And I think we see evidence of that everywhere. Well, Egypt is a good example of it. We're designed to fight other people with foreign ideologies. This